I'm going to start this video off with a bold claim, and to be honest, given how little story there is for Ravus throughout Final Fantasy 15, I'm not sure how many of you will agree. My claim is that Ravus Nox Fleuret is actually one of the most fleshed out and developed characters in the Final Fantasy 15 universe. Now, I know what you're thinking, Daryl, you've gone insane, and you're clearly delusional right now because you're sick. Characters like Ardyn and Noctis have so much more depth, and to that I will simply say there was a time when I would have agreed. Upon finishing up with my game, Ravus was not in my thinking as a strong character. Heck, Ravus wasn't even in my thinking at all other than sympathy for how badly his story was handled. But going back and looking at his story in a bit more detail has actually helped me see the depth that's not quite so obvious at first glance. By doing so, I saw development, and how in a weird way, he is one of the few characters who flourishes in this story despite the clear obstacles that are presented in terms of execution. By the end of this video, I hope to convince you of my claim, and even if I don't, I hope that you will gain a new appreciation for Ravus as a character. I mean, we all know that Ravus was pretty screwed when it comes to the story, and I'm actually quite glad that they've already confirmed they will be adding additional scenes to help explain his motivations. Anything they can do to shine more light on this character is a good thing in my eyes. This video will feature a full overview of Ravus' story, with opinions sliced in. This will then be followed by a breakdown of how I feel about Ravus, and I will look to justify why I believe he's one of the best characters in the game. I therefore do need to point out this video will not be shy with the spoilers. We're going heavy across Kingsglaive and Final Fantasy 15, so if you haven't experienced either, be warned, you may be on the wrong end of some nasty shocks. I also want to note that I'm not going to talk about the character that might have been. Ravus was of course known as the Hooded Man for a long time, and at one point was even shown wielding similar powers to Noctis. But this is all in the past and was clearly changed. The character we ended up with is rather different and made his debut in Kingsglaive Final Fantasy 15 as the brother of Lunafreya Nox Fleuret. In fact, Ravus is one of the first characters we see in the film as Niflheim forces launch an assault on Tenebrae. In the confusion, Ravus is wounded by gunfire and becomes the target of an MT. But instead of being killed, it's his mother, Queen Slyva, who sacrifices herself so that her son may live. She bears the brunt of the MT's flamethrower and is then run through by General Glauca, all in front of Ravus' eyes. As I'm sure you can appreciate, this would be a lot for a 16-year-old to take on. He becomes distraught, paralysed by instant grief and fear, and this plays a part in the decisions that follow. Instead of trying to escape with Regis, Noctis and his sister Lunafreya, Ravus decides to stay beside his mother and call to Regis for aid. Given the odds, Regis naturally wants to get the hell out of there with his son, who is of course the prophesized King of Light. He also is not equipped for a full-on military conflict and wants to minimise losses where possible. But Ravus cannot see this, and according to the story, he instead sees what Regis did as abandoning not only him in his time of need, but Tenebrae as a whole, all for the sake of saving his own son. I remember sitting there in the theatre as this was happening thinking, given the circumstances, how on earth could anyone blame Regis for what happened that day as opposed to, the Niflheim Empire, or even more specifically, General Glauca, the guy who murdered his mother? Even looking back, I still find it baffling that Ravus blames Regis for his mother's death and the loss of Tenebrae to the Empire. But either way, that's how it is, and due to his misdirected blame, Ravus swears revenge on the Caelum lineage as well as the entire Lucian kingdom. Lunafreya even tries to convince him that he's got this the wrong way round, that Regis is not the bad guy here, but he doesn't want to listen. Anyway, as he stayed in Tenebrae following the attack, Ravus ends up under the watchful eye of the Empire, and although it is not confirmed anywhere to my knowledge, I am assuming that Ravus therefore joins the Imperial army so that one day he can take his revenge against Regis. That day comes 12 years later in the new calendar date of ME 756. Ravus is now a high-ranking officer in the Imperial Army and heads to Insomnia to witness the signing of the peace treaty. As we know, things go pretty south for Regis during this time, much to the satisfaction of Ravus, and at one point during proceedings an opportunity presents itself as Glauca manages to slice the Ring of the Lucii from Regis' hand. You see, during those 12 years, Ravus had plenty of time to let that rage build, and one of his thoughts related to Noctis and how he does not deserve to be the chosen one, prophecy or otherwise. Ravus believes that he is just as worthy of being the King of Light due to him being from the Nox Fleuret bloodline, aka the Oracle bloodline. However, when he places the Ring of Lucii on his finger, he is rejected and ends up severely burned. Now at this point I was thinking, damn, that's one hell of a setup for Final Fantasy 15. We have got a character in a position of power who already hates the Caelum lineage, and he has just been rejected by the Ring of the Lucii, the one thing that symbolises the Caelum lineage beyond all else. Not only that, his prosthetic arm leaves him with a permanent reminder of this rejection. Justified or not, Ravus would have a serious axe to grind against Noctis. I mean, why else would they even put him in Kingsglaive if it wasn't for a higher purpose? Why else, indeed? At the start of the game, we see Ravus appear in Iedolas' throne room, where he is given complete control of the Niflheim army. What follows is an emotional encounter with Noctis, where he bests Gladiolus with ease, and only Ardyn's intervention stops things from escalating further, with Ravus quite blatantly stating that the death of Noctis may be as preordained as the King of Light prophecy. At this point, I was rubbing my hands with glee, thinking this must be a sit-up scene for something more powerful later on, right? Wrong. Apparently. I was so optimistic about a meaningful rivalry between Ravus and Noctis that never materialised, and the relationship was essentially reduced to just that one scene in the entire game. The next time we see Ravus is also the last time we see him in the game's current timeline. I mean, he does appear after, but only in flashbacks or as a demon. And even that scene, which sees Ravus talking with Ardyn before the fight with Leviathan, seems quite inconsequential at the time. But it's in these last few scenes where Ravus' hidden depth starts to play out, and the cryptic dots he laid out start to connect. So that's where I'm going to begin with my more critical analysis. You see, there is some truth in what I said earlier about Ravus' motivations, but I feel as though this is also where the disservice to Ravus comes through. On face value, he was just a one-dimensional, bitter character who wanted revenge, but in reality, he was a deeply troubled character who wanted to do nothing more than save his sister. Sure, he clearly harbours ill will against the Caelum lineage, of which Noctis is of course the focus, but when you look a little harder, you can also see the soft, caring individual that existed before that incident in Tenebrae. Through flashbacks, we later learn that Ravus, despite all his animosity against Noctis and the Caelum family, came to accept that he needed to support Noctis so that the world could be saved. Despite being confused and even angered by his sister's actions for years of his life, he came to the realization that his anger was misplaced and has a change of heart. The sword he took from Regis as a trophy, perhaps with the hope of one day being able to wield it, becomes a gift, a symbol of peace. It's a gesture so extreme that even Noctis is a bit puzzled when he's told that he has gained Ravus' support in his quest. Now, I'm not afraid to admit that many of Ravus' scenes actually went over my head the first time I played through Final Fantasy 15, and I cannot be alone here. Looking around, I see nothing but disappointment with how Ravus was portrayed. I mean, much of what he says when he actually appears is so vague. It's only when you go back and look through what was said with a fine tooth comb that you can truly understand what Ravus was talking about. It's like when you play through Final Fantasy X a second time, you can see all those hints about Yuna's fate that you missed the first time around. Let's take a look at when he encounters Noctis at the Imperial base. It's an emotion-fueled scene that even without further analysis comes across as strong. However, unless you're rewatching the scene or you've seen Kingsglaive before, you only get half the story. The first thing he says is that Noctis receives the Storm's blessing, and yet he knows nothing of the consequences. From this, we can infer that Ravus is talking about Noctis' triumph over Ramuh, and that there's something else afoot that he's unaware of. Quite so, as later on in the game we learn that the consequence Ravus spoke of is that Lunafreya is killing herself to help Noctis, something that we were unaware of at the time, and I'd also assumed Noctis himself is likely unaware of too. Next, he makes a sarcastic, bitter remark about how Noctis is heir to the crown befitting no other. He says this while looking at his wounded arm and clenching his fist. It's emotional in terms of delivery, but if you haven't watched Kingsglaive, the statement has somewhat limited meaning. By watching Kingsglaive, it's easy to see that there's real purpose here. Not only is Ravus making reference to the humiliation he suffered by being rejected as the King of Light, but also the clear pain he suffered as a result of that rejection. That last line is actually the only time we can make a clear connection between the film and the game, and honestly I feel as though this disparity is part of what makes Ravus a difficult character to understand. In every piece of narrative in Kingsglaive, Ravus is painted as an individual driven by his thirst for power and his quest for revenge against the Caelum lineage, whereas in Final Fantasy 15 this only manifests itself in that one line. Almost every other piece of narrative paints Ravus as an individual who is driven by his desire to save his sister's life. Now I don't know if someone just didn't get the memo here, but it does seem rather odd. Then again, it's not the only oddity that exists between these two properties. How Ravus' scenes were presented is also somewhat disjointed, often to the benefit of others. I mean, I understand that it's to help the development of Noctis, but it still bugs me that they show a scene where Ravus is supporting Lunafreya as she falters, only to then follow it with a scene where Ravus goes back to saying he doesn't support Lunafreya. Either way, when you read between the lines, it all boils down to this. Ravus knows that the covenant Lunafreya is undertaking with the Archaeans is killing her, a covenant that she is undertaking because she believes that Noctis, from the bloodline that Ravus hates, is the true King of Light. Ravus also believed for a long time that he should be the King of Light, not Noctis. If you have a sister, I'd like to think it's a really extreme version of her boyfriend not meeting up to your standards. In the scenes that feature Lunafreya and Ravus, you can feel that emotion. Ravus loves his sister deeply and wants her to be safe. However, part of me feels as though he accepts that this cannot be. After all, she is the Oracle, and he would have been prepared for this. I feel as though much of his angst actually comes from the fact that the person she's throwing her life away for is Noctis. I genuinely implore you to go back and watch the scene where Lunafreya talks about not being strong enough to carry on. With everything we know about Ravus, the hatred in his heart, the loathing of Noctis, for him to be the bigger man and choose to show his support for his sister, this has become one of the most significant scenes to me. It's so well done. And it just really makes me wonder why they chose not to push the relationship between Noctis and Ravus further, because there was so much potential there. Following the death of Luna, even though it isn't clearly specified anywhere to my knowledge, Ravus decides to retaliate against the Empire. They in turn send demons to torch Fenestala Manor and the lands that surround it, hence why he gets Tenebrae it's all on fire. They also blame Ravus as the High Commander of the Imperial Army for the catastrophe against Leviathan. He is therefore sentenced to death, something which he resists, which leads to, well, his death. Looking at his scenes and the choice of words used, despite the little we see of Ravus throughout Final Fantasy 15 and ignoring the hiccups that exist between Kingsglaive and the game, I firmly believe that he is a character who has some of the strongest development, perhaps more than any other character in the game. It's just not front and centre and is therefore easy to overlook. Ravus just has so many subtle touches. I mean, I mentioned earlier that he has an inconsequential scene with Ardyn and Altissia. In terms of the main story, that's quite true. However, this scene appears chronologically after Ravus offers his support to Lunafreya, and takes place at the church where she was to be wed to Noctis. I want to believe that this was a subtle ode, signalling that Ravus was now in support of their union. We also see Ravus lie to Ardyn about speaking to Lunafreya, something which seems out of character, as he has often been very obedient. Perhaps this is the moment where he decided that he would no longer be the Empire's lapdog. In summary, with Ravus, we have a character who goes through an emotional roller coaster, and these emotions, whether justified or not, impact how he behaves in a big way. For me, he had the hallmarks of a classic Final Fantasy character such as Gabranth. There's a story of redemption here, and it's just unfortunate that the scriptwriters decided not to have that A, play out in a consistent manner, or B, in a manner which we could easily comprehend. Despite this, he still shows significant development. Sure, you can only really see that when you go back and analyse the story, but the fact he overcomes his thirst for revenge, which he harboured for 12 years, shows his strength as a character within the wider narrative. I'm pleased that there will be additional scenes coming for Ravus to help make this more apparent, but for now, I hope this video helped to show what Ravus brought to the table, and why he's become one of my more favoured characters in Final Fantasy 15. Let me know how you feel about Ravus in the comments below, and let me know who you think would be a good study for my next video. I was thinking about doing Ignis, who I also feel has a powerful story, but I'm open to suggestion. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. This is Daryl, signing out. See you next time guys, hopefully I'll be feeling a little bit better then.